Yo, this is Zist. Today we're going to be talking about the Gameplay Ability System. This is going to be a high-level conceptual overview of the system as it's implemented in Lyra Starter Game. There may be other ways to do this in other contexts, but I have not used the Gameplay Ability System except in Lyra, and so this is my use case, and therefore that's what we're going to talk about. Gameplay abilities are a little bit different than other objects. They don't really have an owner all the time. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. The life cycle is that an ability will be granted to an owner or an actor, and on give ability is executed. Then the owner has the ability, and it's going to be calling activate ability potentially many times. And then at some point, the ability will be removed from the actor. On give ability and on remove ability are great places to set up pointers to things. For example, I like to get the player controller and the player state so that I don't have to continually search for those as the ability is being called. The ability may be called a million times. I don't want to search for the player controller a million times. I only need to do it once. It goes in on give ability. Activation events occur while owned. Basically what Lyra does is it says if can activate, then activate. Now can activate by default just returns true, so you don't need to worry about that unless you want there to be circumstances in which an ability cannot be activated. But for our purposes, we just say for now this is always going to be true. So activate ability is really what you need to worry about. Note, this is very important. Once activate ability is called, you cannot use this ability again until you call end ability, and it is your responsibility to call end ability. Okay, you're going to decide when to do that. You may, if it's an instant ability, you may end it immediately. If it's an ability that takes place over time, then you will persist this ability into the future. But again, you will not be able to activate it again until end ability is called. Do not call the Lyra Gameplay Ability version of activate ability. It is garbage. What it does is it says if we have a blueprint implemented event, then use it. If we don't, then unconditionally commit this ability and don't bother checking if that worked or not. So we don't want to do that. That is dumb. It seems that every single gameplay ability that they shipped was implemented in blueprints rather than C++, and so this code never runs in Lyra with the stuff that they shipped. You should not run it either. What I've done is I have made here my own base ability class called XCL Zist Core Lyra Gameplay Ability. And essentially, I've added some quality of life stuff, and I've also made the default activate ability not suck. So what mine does is it says if the owner of the ability is the local player, we're going to call this new virtual method activate local player ability. If the owner is the server, we're going to call this virtual method activate server ability. And so essentially, my gameplay ability is doing this every time activate is run. So there's two different activation methods depending on the context. This one gets run if you're a local player. This one gets run if you are a server. You don't have to duplicate this code in every single ability that you're going to write. It's done for you right here. Network mode variance is definitely important to understand. In standalone mode, the variant that gets run is the local player variant, which is this activate local player ability. And interesting to note is that the owner client is also the server in this mode. So single player sitting down, what's going to happen? This gets run and it has authority. On a multiplayer client, it's also running the local player variant, which is this one, but it does not have authority this time. On a listen server, if the player that's sitting down physically at the server is activating the ability, it's going to run local player ability, again, with authority. If the listen server gets called for an a client that's a remote player, then the server ability is going to get run. And on a dedicated server, the server ability always gets run. So this is a very important concept that you need to understand, because server ability is always running as the server, but local player ability is running as the server in the case of standalone, and in the case of local player is the server player, but not in the case of local player is a remote player. So by default, my version of the gameplay ability does nothing at all. And essentially, blueprints are called if they exist, otherwise nothing happens. For any events that should run on the local player's machine, you need to implement this activate local player ability method. For any events that should run on the server, you implement this activate server ability method. And again, just a note here that listen server is special. So I found a nice end ability implementation, and it looks something like this. If end ability is valid, and if the prediction scope lock count is 0, then we'll go ahead and end ability. So what I did is I added this end ability cleanup method here. And essentially you no longer have to do anything with end ability. All you do is you implement end ability cleanup, and whenever it's actually time to clean up, this gets called. Otherwise, what ends up happening is this just keeps looping and looping and looping until all of the prediction scopes have expired. Then it calls this, and then it calls the super, which actually ends the ability. So you don't necessarily need to do this, but I definitely recommend it. Moving on to the net execution policy. We talked about this a little bit, but there is a net execution policy setting in the gameplay ability. And by default, it's set to local predicted, which means the client runs the ability and the server runs the ability. Note that this does require client to server RPC, which I'm not going to cover in this video. There's another video that I will do that talks about this, because this is quite a complex topic. There's also local only, which runs on the client, does not run on the server. It's great to use for UI abilities. There's server only, which does not run on the client, does run on the server. And there's server initiated, which starts on the server and can propagate to the client. If you want more information about the client to server RPC, I have linked a tutorial here, and I'll cover that in another video. I'll link it in the description below. Let's take a look at an example here. I'm going to play with 2 players as a listen server. Okay, so on the left side, we have the server. If I push the F key, a bot is spawned. So that was a client-initiated server-run ability. You see the bot spawned both on the server side and on the client side. The server, if I click on this, now it's selected, and I can right-click over here, and the bot moves over there, and it happens on both clients. If I come over here now to the client side and I push F, the client spawns in a bot. So that's on the client's team, the blue team. Again, I can click on it and right click, and here it moves. This is a client initiated server RPC ability. So the client is determining where the mouse is, creating target data, and sending that to the server so the server knows where to move the bots. This is kind of a complex process, which I'm going to cover in another video that I will link below. So there you go, overall concept of gameplay abilities in under 10 minutes. If you're interested in more, make sure you take a look at my blog. I'll link it in the description. If this video doesn't suck, please consider liking or subscribing or sharing with somebody who might be interested. If you have questions or ideas for better implementation, please let me know in the comments. See you next time.